Oh, hello, welcome to this video. I'm here with Coyne, and we're going to be talking about transforming leadership. So leaders have a pretty tough time at the moment, and we wanted to share our expertise and some of our learning around what we've seen doesn't work and does work, and some models around how people might be able to move forwards. So welcome, Sue.
Lovely to be with you, Simon.
Awesome. Do you want to say a bit about who you are and your experience?
Yeah, so I'm a leadership and systemic team coach. I work in all sorts of different situations, including agile transformation. And I suppose what I'm bringing is 37 years of leadership experience. I'm getting on a bit. So for 20 years, I was a leader of my own business. And then for 17 years, I've been a leadership coach, both coaching individual leaders and leadership teams. So that's what I'm bringing. What about you? What's your part in this?
Well, thanks, Sue. So I have been also working with leadership and transformations for probably about 20 years or so. I started off within the IT world and ended up doing rather large software deliveries, sort of tens of thousands of people, and pretty much realized that it was mostly the challenges were with people rather than technology, and organizing and working out how we can run organizations in a good way to actually deliver things. And so I've spent the last 10 years building up a community of practice, and off the back of that, a coaching and training company to help leaders to really embrace some of the new ways of thinking and new ways that we've got to solving some of today's problems. And trying to make the world a better place through better leadership and better products and services. So you've actually written a couple of books, Sue, around this as well.
I've written a leadership book called Stop Doing, Start Leading, which is really to help people transition from managing and being a specialist in their field, to the broader aspects of leadership. And the other one is the zone of connection. It's about being able to be present in the moment as a leader. And it's quite an advanced level of leadership to stay so present that you can choose how to respond in the moment, what the appropriate leadership style is.
And these are absolutely critical skills that leaders are going to need today. And we're going to explore now some of the reasons why. Why are those things absolutely essential for leadership? And we'll have a look at, first of all, what kind of problems that leaders face, or what kind of landscape are our organizations finding themselves in today's crazy world.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. You're talking about crazy times, Simon, and I think this diagram here, this picture of the VUCA Times, is quite a good way of representing these crazy times. Many people have heard of VUCA. It's actually an acronym that was coined by the American military after the Cold War, and particularly used to describe the theatre in places like Afghanistan. But since the financial crisis, it's been applied to the business world that we both work in. And VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think certainly with the recent COVID-19 crisis, we'll all recognize a lot of these conditions in terms of the circumstances that we're working in. But what people often haven't seen is that antidote to VUCA, which is a vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. So maybe that's something we could talk to a little bit as we have our conversation. But I'm just wondering, given this environment, these conditions that leaders are working and leading in at the moment, what would you say? What do you think they're needing? What do you think they're feeling, saying? What comes to you when we see this slide?
So I think that everybody has a very shallow understanding of what it's like to be in complexity and ambiguity and all those other things, volatility and uncertainty. I think there's a shallow understanding that most people have. And when they look at the world around them, they see it through the lens of the way that they've been doing things already and the relationships that they already have. And I don't think that many leaders realize that the types of problem and the way that they themselves have to relate to those problems and the people around them have to change when we're dealing with extreme VUCA situations. So there is a model which also people may be familiar with, which is the Coyne model. So this model from Dave Snowden is a fantastic way of sort of segmenting out the types of problem that we face. And then after that, I think that it would be good for us to probably talk about how leaders need to develop themselves to deal with these problems. So let's first of all have a look at the different problems that one might find oneself in. And I'll talk ever so briefly about this. There's a fair amount of information about Coyne out on the web, and I'm going to talk actually in quite a shallow way about it, but it's enough that we can understand what it is from a leadership perspective. So there are, and I'm actually only going to talk about the 4 domains of different types of problems. There's the clear problem, where it is obvious what the solution is to whatever problem you're facing. So this is a layperson would be able to know or understand what the solution is. An example of this may be things like understanding traffic or road signs. If we're driving down the road, it doesn't take very long to figure out what the road signs are. And we know that we need to follow those road signs and we need to follow a set of rules. And if we follow rules, then in this clear or obvious type of problem, then we get repeatable results. If we keep following those road signs, we're probably going to, there's a very reduced chance of having an accident, and that's a repeatable situation. Complicated is another type of challenge, another type of problem, where we now need some kind of expert or somebody who is skilled or has been taught, perhaps over a longer period of time, in a particular in whatever expertise is needed for this particular type of problem. So this is the domain of the expert. And typically to solve these types of problems, we want to get experts together. We want to put experts together so that they can learn some of the best practices or good practices. And we want for them to bounce ideas off of each other and come up with different ways to solve the problem. And this is seen very much in very, very basic software solutions of the sort of 1990s or earlier. And very quickly, we move on from complicated into this complex domain when we're talking about anything to do with software in today's world, or any type of product development, or even organizational change itself ends up being in this complex space. And the complex type of problems is where, by the very nature of us trying to solve the problem, we change the problem itself. So another word for this is complex or an adaptive problem. So we have to adapt continually our approach as the problem changes as time goes on. And this is really very much the VUCA world that we find ourselves in, certainly as leaders with any size large company. And for these types of problems, typically we want to be able to have cross-functional teams we want to have different experts together for a much wider and rapid response to being able to solve the problem as far as we can, see what impact that has, learn from that, take that feedback and plan the next small iteration or small way forwards. And it's a constantly evolving and adaptive approach to moving our organizations forwards. The final domain down the bottom is the chaotic. And this is really where we are in emergency state and we are trying to move as quickly as we can back to one of the other states. So, for example, we may have been certainly most organizations found themselves in a chaotic space at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So we knew that we needed to move our businesses, which had suddenly gone from fairly, predictable or at least business as usual, where we were doing things on a rhythm or a cadence, to suddenly we had the carpet or the rug pulled out from underneath of us. And we entered into a very chaotic state. And most business leaders at this point want to, as fast as possible, to get their businesses back into one of the other domains. And that's kind of the different types of problems. The problems that we are going to focus on or talking about in this conversation, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, is really in the complex adaptive space, which is most product and service businesses, certainly anything to do with organizational change. And that's kind of where we are. So did we want to have a quick look at, so now we know what kind of problems we're facing. We're facing complex problems that change all the time. We're in a VUCA world. What kind of leadership what kind of leaders, what kind of attributes rather, do leaders need to work in this very dynamic and fast-paced world?
I think what I'll just say while we keep this slide on for a moment, Simon, is I've seen some research that links leadership to this Cynefin model. It's quite interesting. And the vast majority of leaders are currently only comfortable in that clear, obvious box. I think it's 75% of leaders who are comfortable leading in that sort of environment. A further about 20% are comfortable in the complicated box. And there's only 5% of leaders, believe it or not, who actually feel comfortable leading in complexity. So we're really facing a bit of a crisis, I think, because the world's getting more and more complicated, and we just don't have enough leaders who are growing and developing themselves sufficiently to be able to lead in that complex box.
Which is, which is obviously quite worrying, considering the amount of jobs, the amount of money, the amount of products, the way that our society is linked together. It's quite worrying from a society and a systemic point of view. And I can imagine it would be very worrying for any leader who finds themselves in an organization where they keep doing more and more work, but seemingly not getting the results. And that's one of the symptoms, I think, for people who aren't in that 5%, who find themselves in this place. For that 95% of leader who doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't understand the real challenges of real complexity, means that often people are working harder and harder and harder, and yet they're still not seeing the results that they're hoping for.
Yes, absolutely. I think if we move to the next slide, I might be able to sort of talk through why that's happening. You know, you talk about them working harder and harder and trying harder and harder and doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah. Probably using the horizontal development, the horizontal skills that they've learned over many, many years, and thinking those skills are still going to get them the results that they're looking for. Where what we're talking about here is what's called vertical development. It's about growing as a human being, growing as an individual, doing that inner work to develop and mature as a leader so that you go through the different stages. So if you see there on that slide where it says complexity of self, this is a theory about the different stages of maturity of the adult mind, if you like. So the 75% of leaders who are comfortable in that obvious and that clear box, they would be at that socialized mind level. That's a sort of a dependent mind where it's very externally referenced. You try to meet the expectations of others. You worry about what others think. You like to be given instructions and told what to do. 20% who are comfortable in the complicated box would probably be at that self-authoring stage, where that's more an independent mind rather than dependent. And it's somebody who's very clear on their own views of the world, who they are as a leader. And they're more internally referenced, really. And they're happy to accept challenges, deliver results, but still they're not really ready for that leading in complexity. Where what you need is this self-transforming mind. And this is where agile leadership comes in, and it's an interdependent mind. Like you said, it's getting all those different experts together, having that collective intelligence, and then integrating that into a more inclusive worldview. So it's not really about horizontal development and building more and more skills. It's about this vertical development and growing and maturing as a leader.
This is something which I have seen starting to appear in some HR training is coaching. And one of the, and normally it's like sort of, 2 hours a year of development that some leaders are given through basic HR training, which clearly isn't enough. But sort of coaching is one of those skills, I think, which once you start learning coaching, you kind of develop something inside of you which allows you to step back from that sort of expert mindset or the self-authoring, and perhaps, start to build those environments for others to do amazing things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so you can see with a tree that how that links to the VUCA, the extent of complexity in the context in which you're working. The more vertical development, more maturity you need as a leader.
So what we're saying then is that the type of problems that we face or leaders face in their organizations has shifted over the last 20 years. The world has got significantly more complex, volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous. The skills that are required for leaders to be able to navigate in such a different world, not only are the outer skills or the tangible things that you can see in the outside world, but also the inner skills, the relationship skills, the self-management skills, development skills. Those kind of things create the effectiveness. And so that enables people to develop themselves beyond the socialized mind into self-authoring, leaving the expert behind perhaps, and then moving into self-transforming, which is in this currently 5%, which then takes us into leaders being able to eat the sweet fruit at the top of the tree here, and deal with the real challenges that they are needing to develop.
Absolutely. Love that metaphor, the sweet fruit. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Thank you for that. So what is it? How can leaders? What is the path? How could a leader who is currently in the 75 or 20% move towards being able to deal with these things? What would be a good path, I guess?
Well, I think really what we need to help them understand is where are they now and where do they need to get to. It's so vital because, as we know, when leading a transformation, 70% of what happens in the organization comes from imitating the leaders. So leaders have to be leading the way. They have to be ahead of the organization. And so I think we can help them find out, where am I now? And where do I need to move to be able to transform myself so that I can transform the organization?
Yeah, and I guess a simple benchmark of whether anyone's actually doing this now is, you might ask yourself, if you're watching this, is like, what inner development have you done as a leader in the last 12 months? Is there a strategy within the organization for inner development? And how does that relate to the overall organizational strategy and the problems that are being solved? Are people able to collaborate, have a very trusting environment? Are people able to innovate in the organization? Is there the space and culture for that? And do managers support it with their behavior, not just with what they say?
And as you say that, that's making me think about some of the organizations I've worked in. And I can think of one where it's sort of got a very expert background. They have a lot of engineers in that organization. And I've been working with the leadership team, and it's a very large global business, and the CEO of the whole group is saying that the whole business needs to be much more responsive, more agile to all of its markets, which are changing dramatically. And what they've realized is that the people they have in leadership positions they're coming from that expert place. They're just from that socialized mind. They're just not ready for the agility and to transform the organization to respond much more quickly to the changes in the market. So they're basically needing to shift their culture to stay competitive. But what they're having to do, they haven't got time to invest in their current leaders in this situation. They're actually having to change them out and recruiting new ones, which is quite devastating for some of those leaders. So it's really recognizing, to avoid that capability gap in your leadership developing, it's investing in this vertical development in time, if you like.
Yeah, well, that's quite. If we think about that a leader, that an organisation is the culture of an organisation is so highly dependent on how the leaders show up and their internal skills, then if leaders aren't able to develop in time, if we're not putting in that time to develop leadership, then in your example, they've run out of time in their particular situation and are having to swap out leaders, and people, I assume, may be losing their jobs or being demoted or moved out somewhere, but new leaders are coming in, perhaps hopefully with the right skills to guide the organization. So I'm pretty sure that organizations and leaders would much rather a more gradual process of learning than such a sort of emergency swap around, I guess.
Yeah. And you talk about prerequisites, for agile transformation. I'm wondering, is this one of those prerequisites?
Yes. So I think with the prerequisites, there are quite a few different things that leaders absolutely must address, or at least have conversations about before engaging in any transformation. And some of those things are to look at what actually is that transformation, why are we actually doing it, what is the purpose? And then once we start looking at, well, how are we going to change the organization to meet those business objectives, meet the marketplace where it is, some of that conversation has to be around what type of internal culture is going to allow us to succeed. And how do we create that culture? And are we ourselves as a leadership team showing up as the right people to create that type of culture? Do we even know how we're showing up? Are we even aware of what the impact of us is? And one of the things which, a quick story is that from a client quite a while ago now, actually, was that the leadership tends to feel that they belong in a safe organization because they are highly privileged in the sense that they have their positional privilege within the organization. And so to think that an organization is a safe place, a courageous place to work as a leader is a fairly naive point of view. And it isn't really until you start talking to and asking people if they're even safe enough to speak about how safe they are, then you realize that actually the way leaders show up actually creates quite a lot of unsafety, psychological safety within an organization, which actually hinders communication, collaboration, and innovation. And those are all things which are required in a VUCA world. And until we can get some kind of real assessment of leadership, to see from their peers and from others, to see how they're actually showing up, what impact they have. Often that is completely hidden to leadership. And I have seen people literally in dismay in the boardroom. What is wrong with these people? Why aren't they able to say when things aren't going right? What is wrong with them? Why aren't they telling me when things go wrong? And obviously they're thinking that the person is totally safe to tell them that. Yeah. But clearly they're not. So it's no one's fault, but there clearly needs to be a shift in what's happening to allow this innovation to take place.
And you talked about getting feedback, getting measurement, and I'm wondering whether that's really where we can start to help them, whether we can use what's on, if you can go on to the next slide. This is an example of an assessment from the Leadership Circle. It's called the Leadership Culture Survey or the Collective Leadership Assessment. And those scales at the side, we can use those to try to determine, well, where are these leaders collectively? There's an individual assessment, but this is the collective one. Where are those leaders collectively in terms of socialized mind, self-authored mind, self-transforming mind? And then the detail in the circle, we can determine where they are now and which aspects of the things in that circle do they need to focus on to shift through to the self-transforming mind, through the self-authoring and then to the self-transforming mind. So it not only shows them where they are in terms of those stages of development, but gives guidance on how they need to change their leadership mindset, their leadership style in order to move through to the next level.
So that's absolutely fascinating. So what we've got then, Sue, is a clear understanding that the market has changed. We've got a clear understanding of what leadership is required. And we've got an assessment tool, both for individual leaders and for the collective leadership team, to see how they're doing collectively in terms of what is needed to solve these types of problems. And then we can see any gaps, we can see anything that needs developing in a positive way, because everybody can always improve, rather than it being a negative thing. It's like, well, what of those things can improve? So once they see this, once we have this this map, if you like, of what needs to happen, what happens then with the leadership team? What can we offer in terms of so they've got the map, they know what the shortfall is. What happens next?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that we would do is debrief collectively with them. That, let's say they did the collective assessment, we'd do a collective debrief with them. If it was the individual, we'd do individual debriefs and then bring it together as a collective. And then it would be co-creating with them. It's not something that we would want to be doing to them. It's something they're doing with them, if you like. We're walking alongside them on this journey of development. So taking into account their strategy, whatever needs to happen in their organization to deliver on that strategy, and what this is saying in terms of where they are now and where they need to get to lead the organization forward through that transformation, then we would co-create a journey with them that could include coaching, individual team coaching. It could be that we sit in and watch them deliver certain things within the organization and coach them in the moment. It could be training on specific aspects of the softer skills of leadership, leading transformation. I mean, those are my thoughts. What are yours?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I think what you've hit upon is absolutely key. It's tying it into the overall business strategy. How much self-development do we actually need? You know, we don't all need to be Nelson Mandela's or Gandhi or, the Dalai Lama. So how much do we need? You know, how much people skills do we actually need to meet the organizational strategy going forwards? And so things that we've done in the past is look at self-development journeys, specifically around the intent of being able to achieve whatever strategic outcomes we're looking for in the organization. I think that the leadership circle things you've talked through are a fantastic place to start. And then that gives us a really good blueprint. And then we can work, as you say, working with leaders, co-creating what is necessary for them, either individually or as a team. Certainly things like alignment as well on what the actual business challenges are. Because it's quite surprising that when you talk to a leadership team, when you talk to their SLT or the senior leadership team beneath them, perhaps their reports, they might well still be very senior managers. There's actually quite a difference in what they believe the direction of the company is. And then as you go further down the organization, typically in hierarchical organizations, the vision gets lost. And I think that sometimes there's a power there of that communication, the way that leaders are expressing things, and the meaning that they put behind them needs to be sort of spread out a little bit. And often some of the power gets lost in the way that leaders are showing up, even though they've got that mission and that amazing enthusiasm. It somehow gets lost in translation. And I think there's also some work there that can be done in terms of the way that people are communicating to other people in the organization as well.
It links back to that VUCA antidote, really, the vision and then the understanding. How are you communicating that you understand the people in the organization, that you understand what's required of you? How are you giving them whatever clarity is possible in this complex world that we live in? And then how are you modeling agility and being responsive in the moment to whatever is emerging?
Yeah, and another thing also is having an internal strategy in the organization to make sure that this type of development actually happens not just with the few, but throughout the organization. Mm-hmm. Because actually quite a few times AWA has worked with clients who have one or two amazing leaders who get it. They've done the work for however they've done it. They've done the work. They are leading a transformation. They're really making a difference. And then what happens is that they've got so much successful, they either get poached by another company, they leave for some other reason, and they leave a vacuum. And the whole company descends back down to where it was before the change. And in some cases, it's actually worse. I've seen leaders be replaced because somebody's left with somebody who doesn't have these skills. And typically organizational coaches leave because they're no longer able to do their work. The working goes back to the way it was. and the whole organization sort of implodes into a much worse state than it was, just by one or two of these bright, kind of developed people leave. And any organization that is larger than just a couple of hundred people is going to need a strategic way of growing leaders throughout the organization to make sure that type of thing doesn't happen. And that's also especially even more key at the board level, because if you get one CXO who gets it, is really shaping up the board, shaping up the organization to deal with these VUCA problems, and then they leave for one reason or another, the organization then just kind of doesn't know what to do, because it's not about learning the external skills or copying what they did day to day. It's this inner ability to be able to work with others and to create that energetic space, which drives the organization to success.
That's really interesting. And that reminds me, I've been reading a fantastic book called The Nordic Secret, and that's fascinating. And in Scandinavian countries, I think it was Norway and Sweden, after World War II, they recognized that the vertical development of their citizens wasn't sufficient to cope with the Industrial Revolution. So they had what they called a Bildung, an education, personal development for every citizen to take them up to that self-authored level. And that's why they're so successful as countries now. They probably need to do another one now to take them up to the self-transforming. But really, it wasn't just at the top, it wasn't just the leaders, it was every citizen was given that opportunity to personally develop to that next level.
Oh, that's incredible. Maybe pessimistically, I couldn't imagine that happening here in the UK somehow. It's such a shame. But certainly with the small areas that we can control within the organizations, having that kind of leadership program or strategy to raise up that leadership level is so key. Another thing we've mentioned actually is the expert. So many of us went through traditional normal schooling. We're taught to be experts. We are, our exams are on us. If you collaborate in an exam, it's cheating. So we're brought up to be individuals and to be expert. Then we go into the job market and we have this thing called a curriculum or a CV or a resume, depending on where you come from. And this tells us how amazing we are and all the history that we've got, and this little story about us as individuals. And then we get employed into a job role. And the job role is typically you're an expert in that field. And normally we then go into some kind of silo department, be sales, marketing, finance, IT, whatever it is. And you are now with experts like you, and you learn and you grow in that expertise in the organization. And this is the development part which most people go on. Yeah. And when we have that, if we think back to the Coyne model, that type of progress is specifically designed around the complicated problem, not the complex problem. So all of our career path, all of our education has been geared up to training us in problems which we no longer solve.
Absolutely.
And this, now we must take these training, this training beyond the individual, move past the expert into creating cultures, networks, collaboration centers, all these kind of things where we're able now to shift, to leverage the power of the brains of more than one person in different skill sets. And, if we think about things like climate change, these can't be solved by any one country, any one person. It creates a need for us to have different skill sets to solve these problems. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about, isn't it? It's evolving beyond the standard education pattern.
It is. And it's very much in service of the collective. So that, but what I'm noticing in some of the teams I'm working with, we do need to do little accelerator coaching sessions with some of the individuals who maybe are at that socialized mind level, just to boost them up a little bit, but not just for their own individual development, so that they can therefore raise the contribution of the collective. So it's all in service of the collective. Absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing for us in the West here as well, because we're very individualistically minded. I mean, the worst case of this, in my humble opinion, has been the recent US administration, which has now disappeared. Very, very individualistic character. It's very much about dividing, and it's very like America first. It's a very individualistic way of thinking about things, and we see this also within the scientific revolution. It's about, what do I think? What is it that I need, I want in my life? And the best that we get is really, I think, thinking about family. Typically, we're very good at expanding beyond the selfish need when we look at our families, and we think, right, well, actually, I'm going to look after my family. My kids, I'll do whatever it takes to look after them and make sure they're all right. And it's not a selfish thing. It's a collective thing within the scope of the family. So we can take those kind of feelings and say, right, well, how do we work together in an organization? For these people I don't really know that well, my interests and their interests are aligned. How can we work together and expand out that selfishness, but even to one step greater, so that now our family becomes a little bit wider? And I'm not suggesting that everybody in the organization is the same as my kids or family, but it's just a sort of similar or parallel path that one might use to sort of understand what we're talking about, to sort of go from that individual to the sort of collective belief.
Absolutely, that sense of interdependency, of having a shared vision, a shared purpose, of contributing to something bigger than yourself, and doing that together with other people is very motivating for people. It gives them real meaning in their life. It gives them that sense of belonging, and the individual achievement sort of comes out of that, really. It's much more meaningful for many people to contribute to that bigger purpose and then get that sense of personal satisfaction as a result, as opposed to the other way around, really.
And purpose is such an absolute key thing as well. I mean, when we think about how we achieve our goals in an organization, this is actually got this from Peter Senge. One of the suboptimal ways to achieve goals. One of them was to lower your goals. We can lower our expectations. Another one is to encourage or to try to motivate with negative intent. So if you don't do this, then you'll get that. I must admit, I'm sometimes guilty of that with my children, but certainly that it generally doesn't work. And then the other way is sort of unleveraged will, which is I'm going to achieve this at all costs. And that at all costs often devastates the rest of our lives, because it's not in balance. We're not balancing the whole of our needs and systems. And this was definitely seen, I think, in some of the burnouts that we have at work, when we just focus so much on work and the rest of our lives fall apart. And then really to transcend these suboptimal ways of working is really this sense of purpose or higher purpose. What is it that we're trying to maintain or to grow? Which is kind of takes us all sort of full circle, really, back from where we started. So that's probably a good place to start thinking about wrapping up, I guess.
Absolutely. So what are we offering here? What are we asking people to do then?
Yeah, which is really key. So we know that there's a challenge. We've already done the percentages. We've looked at what the needs are. We know what the problems are. So if you are interested in either going through a personal self-assessment to see what your leadership skills are they shaping up? Are they the right skills and the necessary skills to be effective in today's workplace? If you would like to do this with your leadership team, if you're in the leadership team or you're supporting the leadership team but need the help for us to come in and run an assessment with the whole team, obviously it's completely confidential. We would we'd agree all of those kind of things up front, and we can then help you to see what the gaps are, and then help with a coaching and mentoring approach in terms of filling those gaps. So if you are interested in that, do feel free to get in contact. Contact details coming up now. And we'll be happy to help and discuss how Sue and I will be able to help.
Fantastic.
Is there anything I've missed?
No, I mean, really exciting opportunity to help these leadership teams accelerate their development and really help the organisation thrive and sustainably thrive in the complex world.
It's so exciting, isn't it? I mean, we have to do this as a human body. with the level of complexity in the world today, if we're really going to survive as a human race, we've got to step up our internal game, and this is a way of doing that, and it's very exciting to be part of that.
Absolutely.
And it's exciting to be working with you, Sue.
Definitely.
Brilliant.
Can't wait to get our first opportunity.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to working with you all, and thank you, Sue, very much for your time here. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, Simon.